Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. It's been a tough old week for Norwich City, but they are back in action this Sunday when they have an opportunity to put things right at Carrow Road against Burnley. They'll be delighted to be back at home after two tough games on the road against QPR and Portsmouth, but they do face a team that many are tipping for promotion back to the Premier League. So it certainly won't be an easy one, but Johannes Hoffball will be planning a way to win the game as underdogs, to surprise everyone and to get a good result to turn things around for Norwich as they seem to lose a little bit of momentum. As usual here on Tactics Board, I'm going to take you through my predicted starting 11 for the game. Then we're going to take a bit of a closer look at Burnley and how the game might play out. And then we're going to come on to Ashley Barnes, of course, a bit of a Burnley legend and somebody who got his first start of the season for Norwich on Tuesday. So we're going to talk a little bit about how he affects things, what he offers to the system, and go into detail on that. But we're starting with the team that I think Torrop will choose. So without further ado, here it is. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Jack Stacey at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba in the centre of defence, with Callum Doyle at left back, Jakob Sorensen, Anis Ben Slimane and Emiliano Marcondes in midfield, with Amankwa Forson on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Ante Cianats through the middle up front. Now, a few things in there to discuss, and of course Norwich did manage to stop the rot, as it were, against Portsmouth in the week. Obviously that very poor result against QPR, and although it was an improvement, I still think Torrop will be looking for something quite different from that Portsmouth game. It was a game that he called terrible, and he definitely wanted to dispel any suggestion that this would be how his Norwich team would look going forward. He went for pragmatism because I think he realised that the results were going in the wrong direction away from home. Obviously not an amazing one, but one that it feels has got Norwich back on track, and I think they might be a little bit more expansive for this one, and that's why I can see a couple of changes. It still feels like the right-back debate is raging, and actually Kellen Fisher, for me, took a few steps forward as a substitute against Portsmouth. It wasn't the easiest night for Jack Stacey trying to deal with Josh Murphy. He let him inside him with quite a lot of space a couple of times, and maybe got away without giving a penalty to the home team when he sort of came into the back of Murphy and probably got away with one a little bit there. And then I thought Fisher came on, provided a bit more control defensively, was pretty solid and looked like a pretty good option for Norwich. But the reason why I've got Stacey there actually plays into the right wing debate, and it's because I think Torrop wants that balance of having somebody who's inverted and somebody who's out wide on either side. And if obviously you've got Hernandez out there, then you want probably the inverted fullback of Kellen Fisher. If you've got somebody more inverted and maybe less used to that wide position and less natural out there, then you probably want Jack Stacey out there providing that width. And for me, it still feels like Torrop is fairly reluctant to put Hernandez into that team. We obviously haven't seen him start a league game yet this season, and now that Ante Cianats is performing fairly well up front, it feels like maybe that's a position that he isn't likely to play either. I think Norwich still see him as somebody who can come on and make an impact off the bench, cause a little bit of chaos. That was what he did against Portsmouth, obviously not to much avail, but to a little bit. And I can't see him coming into the starting lineup for this one. So if you want that inverted option, who I think could be Amankwa Forson with Ante Cianats up front, and obviously we'll come on to why I think that is. But in that case, you probably want Jack Stacey back in that sort of wing-back role, giving you more of a direct wide threat. In midfield, I've dropped Marcelino Nunez out of there because actually the plan was for him not to start against Portsmouth based on what Torrop said post-match. He then played a decent number of minutes and got through quite a lot of running as he normally would, and it would be a surprise to see him start 3 games in a week. By contrast, Anis Ben Slimane was dropped down to the bench as somebody who it doesn't appear is likely to play or to start 3 times a week for Norwich, and I think he will come back in. It was a good performance from him actually when he came on. He provided, a bit like Fisher, that sort of control, but got on the ball even more than him in that central area of the pitch, dictated the tempo and actually looked very good for Norwich and looked like the way to them going back to a sort of dominant possession-based style of play. And given that's what I think Norwich will try to do now that they're back at home, you feel like Slimane is somebody they'll want in there, especially if Nunez does drop out for fitness reasons. And I know not everyone is the biggest fan of Jakob Sorensen, and sometimes it does feel like he slows things down a little bit, but it's not the end of the world having him back in that starting lineup. And if one of them has to drop out of Slimane and Nunez, obviously with McLean now suspended for another 3 games, it feels like Sorensen is the only option really to come in. And I think in terms of balance, that's another thing that Torop will have in his mind. Of course, for me, the best 3 available to him in midfield are Marcondes, Nunez and Slimane. But there isn't much by way of defensive instinct in that 3. So I think it could well be Sorensen in there. Up front, I've gone for Seaman over Barnes. And obviously we will come on to Barnes and why tactically he's quite a different option. But I think when Norwich want a little bit more of the ball, and especially when they want to press higher and be a bit more energetic in that sense, which I think is what they'll try to do against Burnley, Seaman probably does give you a bit more from a sort of technical standpoint, and he also runs behind a little bit more. Don't get me wrong, I think that's still an area of his game that he needs to get better at. I think he's got the pace and the physicality to eventually almost be challenging Josh Sargent in that role in terms of pushing the defenders back, you know, putting a bit of fear into them, to be honest, and running in behind them. I think he still looks like somebody who wants to come deeper and receive the ball, but not quite to the extent that Barnes is. And that's why in this sort of game, I think Norwich will go with Seaman up front. But definitely a few options for Torop to choose from. It's getting to the point now where the team selections are actually quite unpredictable. So I wouldn't be surprised at all for me to be wrong on 1 or 2 of those. But that's just where I see Torop going for this one. And as usual, it will be very interesting when that team news drops ahead of this game. Now on to Burnley and the sort of test that actually I don't think Norwich have faced for a little while. It feels like we've been talking for some time now about teams who want to play a little bit more defensively, want to be physical, will go with those long balls, and how Norwich can cope with that and deal with teams who are very different to themselves. But Burnley actually are maybe a little bit more similar to Norwich. They want to dominate the ball. They want to chiefly think about attacking and possession and controlling the game on their terms. And that's where Norwich will need to adapt because, as I said, it has been a while since they faced a team like that. I suppose you look at some of their games where they've struggled, like that QPR one, Portsmouth to an extent, and you'd say that actually this must be the sort of game that they thrive on, given they're back at home, they're more likely to dominate. But I think it will be interesting, and a lot of it is based on actually how each team carries out their plan, because both teams want the same things, really. Both teams want to dominate in that sense. Both teams want to be creating chances through quick passing moves. And when that's the case, you can't really have a clash of styles where both teams are playing well. It feels like one of those teams will need to be in the ascendancy, and it will be really important for Norwich to do that, especially with their home crowd. They'll want to get them excited and on their side early on. So for Norwich, being able to control the game, being able to keep possession against Burnley's high press, that's going to be really, really important for them in this one. And actually, I think their own press is going to be quite important as well, because as I said, Burnley are quite good at breaking teams down, at moving the ball around until they can find an option really and a way to create a chance. A lot of their assists this season have come from through balls. So Norwich as a team that maybe aren't the best at sitting back and defending, certainly their record this season suggests that that's the case. It's important for them to be winning the ball back quickly and in dangerous positions, because if they get in a scenario where Burnley are doing what they're best at, and that's passing the ball around in the opposition half, and Norwich are doing what they're not great at, which is sitting deep and trying to avoid pressure or trying to absorb pressure, that could be where the problems come. So I think that high press and winning the ball back quickly will be really important for them. Otherwise, it will be difficult for them to get as much control as they want and to stop Burnley doing what they want to do in possession. I wanted to finish with a bit of a chat about Ashley Barnes, who is somebody I'm sure is looking forward to this game quite a lot. The first time, of course, he'll come up against Burnley, having left them about 18 months ago to join Norwich and to become quite a key part of their setup under David Wagner. It feels like maybe he hasn't played the same role under Johannes Hoff-Torp, but I don't think a lot of people were expecting him to play as many minutes as he has since coming back from injury. So clearly a role there for him, and definitely one that Torp sees. but it does still feel a little bit at odds with what they're trying to do tactically. Now, you go into a game like Portsmouth where Norwich were trying to be a bit more pragmatic. They were trying to play more aerial balls forward and be safer from how they played out from goal kicks and from Angus Gunn in all situations, really, in those scenarios. And Barnes is actually quite good at taking the ball in. I don't think he's one who's going to be winning loads of headers and loads of flick-ons and maybe being much of a danger to, from crosses into the box, but he will hold the ball up quite well. He'll scrap with defenders and give them a bit of a tough time. And actually, I've seen a little bit of criticism, but I thought he did quite well against Portsmouth. I thought that was an okay game for him. And we can obviously debate the merits of the tactical setup, and it probably wasn't one that Torrent wanted to replicate over the long term. But given that was what they'd chosen and that was what the players had been told to do, I thought Barnes did a decent job of what he was asked to do. Now, the problem comes when Norwich do want to slowly return to that sort of possession-based style, and a lot of the things that I talked about them needing to do against Burnley, I'm not sure Barnes' skill set really suits that. I think the high pressing can be a problem given, and sort of understandably, the lack of pace that maybe he has at times compared to the likes of Seaman and especially Sargent. I also think he doesn't give you as much running in behind, which obviously Sargent does, and that's probably where his major strength is, not only in terms of how he can get in behind and create chances and score chances himself, but also because it stretches the defence. It takes them maybe 5-10 yards further back and then creates the space for the midfielders to have a bit more time on the ball and to try to create those chances. And I don't think Barnes gives you quite as much in that sense, but what he does give you is the ability to make those late runs into the box. And we've heard that talked about a lot in relation to midfielders. I remember Torp speaking about Oscar Schwartau and how that was a major strength of his when he first joined the club. We've seen that from Marcondes as well, and I think they've got a couple of other players who will want to do that, and Barnes probably does fit with that mould. He can take the ball in, spread it out wide, and then when he's got the more advanced forward in front of him, a Seaman or a Sargent, they'll go into sort of the 6-yard box area, and he's very good at timing his runs to arrive sort of on the penalty spot. And if there's a chance there, then he's more likely than almost any other Norwich player to get there. But the problem is where you fit him into the system. Obviously, he was that main number 9 in that Portsmouth game, and I spoke about the merits of that, but equally Torp hasn't really played with a number 10, and actually I asked him that question and he said that he feels Barnes is a number 9. So if you only play with a 6 and 2 8s and that 3 in midfield, especially if you've got Marcondes playing that attacking role, there's not really much of a role for a number 10, and that's why I think maybe coming off the bench is where we could see Barnes in that role going forward. So a few problems for him, a few reasons why he could offer a lot to the team, but he's got a few months now to prove his worth, and I'm sure he'll be absolutely desperate to do that against Burnley this weekend. Plenty of interesting themes going into that one. Of course, we'll have every single one of them covered across our channels. So go to pinkun.com/subscribe if you haven't already, and you'll have access to all of the analysis, all of the live coverage, everything pre-match, loads of good stuff. Thank you very much for joining me on Tactics Board. We'll be back soon, of course, when hopefully the mood is a little bit more positive than it was going into the Burnley game, and it feels a little bit better than it does right now, because it has been tough for Norwich, but an opportunity now for them to show what they're made of against a team that will certainly be in and around it come the end of the season. See you soon.